For this module, I'm going to continue to work with the plunk that we created in the last module. This plunk is already set up with AngularJS included in the page, and we have a few features here. We have the ability to display information about a GitHub user. I'm currently displaying Rob Connery's GitHub information, but if I want to see a different user, I need to come into the source code and change this username portion of the URL. My preview window, which is in an external window now, so we have more space for the editor, it's still set up to automatically refresh. Now I can see new user information, but let's try to make this easier. What I want to be able to do is come into this page and have an input where I can type in any username that I want, click a button, and then it will go out and fetch user information for me. So instead of hard coding that value, I want to be able to input that value as a user. To do this, let's come over into index.html, and here above where I'm displaying user information, let's create a form. I do not need an action, but I think I'll give this form a name. Let's call it search user. And inside the form, which will not be the prettiest form you've ever seen, let's have an input type equals search. This is where I'm going to be able to type the username. So I'll put some placeholder text here of username to find. And for right now, I will close this off and let's have another input, which will be the button I can click on. So this will be type submit, and the value would be, let's have the text search. So one of my first jobs with this form is that I'm going to need to know what the user has typed into that search input. And we've seen how easy it is to move data from the model into the view, but there's a different directive that I need to use to move data from the view into the model. And that directive is ng-model. With ng-model, I can specify an expression like username. And what ng-model will do is, as the user types into that input, ng-model will push the value of the input into my scope object using this expression. So in this case, it's going to appear in my scope as a username property. And if that property doesn't exist, which it currently doesn't, we have scope.user, scope.air, scope.message. So we don't have a username property, but that's okay. This ng-model directive will create that property for me and give my scope a username. In fact, we'll be able to see that if I put a data binding directive here to display username. That will be evaluated against scope. So whatever username is should display both in that binding directive and also in the input. Let's flip over into our page and try it out. Currently notice that there is no username displaying, but I do have my search form. And now if I type Rob Connery, you can see as I'm typing that string, it's appearing as the username above the search form, and it happens instantly with every keystroke. And if for some reason I were to change that username from my model, maybe because I got some information back from a web service call, that updated username would appear both inside of the input and also above the search form where I have the username binding. In fact, I could initialize username inside of my scope. Let's do a scope.username. We can say the default username to search for is Angular. And let's change our message. We're not being introduced to Angular any longer. What we're sort of building is a GitHub viewer. And now as my preview window refreshes, you can see Angular appears there automatically. In fact, let me do an F5, a hard refresh, and you can see that username is there. What we currently don't have is the ability to type in a new username and click this search button and have the application go out and find information about that specific new user. We're going to have to handle this click event, this form submission. We'll do that next. But for now, just know that ng-model, an extremely useful directive because you can apply it to inputs, you can apply it to selects, you can apply it to text areas. And what ng-model will do is always keep your data in sync. It's going to move information that the user types into your model. And if for some reason the model changes, it will move that information back into your inputs.